Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you some of the things that I've done off camera, some of the similar work we've already done, and then make a couple minor tweaks, and then I think we're getting close to being ready to deploy. So, as you can see, I have added all the styles that from the mockups. So here's our login page, and if we log in, this takes us to our input page, which I've added every section. I've added some text for each one before it was all copied. And so this works. If we go to the dashboard, we have the styling that we did on that. The menu works. And then login and sign up work. So, well, they work to an extent. So one thing that I do want to do is I have these first and last name fields, but I don't actually have those fields on my user table. So down here at the bottom, I just have email. So I need to add those two. The other thing that I want to do is if you hit login here with no information, it doesn't work, but it also doesn't tell you anything. So I'd like for this to give you an error message. It does kind of work on sign up. So when you add these two fields, we need to fix the login. And I also want to just kind of briefly show you this little menu. That looks like nothing too fancy, but probably worth just mentioning. So I have this little React component, and it's just toggling and hiding this view that I'm just overlaying over the entire thing. So when you log in, it just has your email and a logout button. And there's a lot of ways you could do this. You could do this with vanilla JavaScript. You could do this with jQuery if you wanted to add it, but since we're already kind of using React, I thought I would just throw it in there. So it's pretty simple. If we look at the render method of the menu, we have the link for logging in, we have the link for logging out. Based on this property that I pass in, props.email, so if we have a logged in user, then obviously we want to give them the ability to log out. If they're not logged in, we'll let them log in. I'll just show you how I'm loading this component. So really simple in the application layout, inside of the nav, creating the menu, and then I'm passing the current user's email, and I'm using this ampersand dot operator or safe navigation, which is very similar to Rails that has this thing called try. And so what that is basically doing is it's saying, if this is present, then do user.email, otherwise return nil. So it's just kind of a shorthand way of writing that. I believe this safe operator is built into Ruby. It's not a Rails thing. So I'm saying, give me the email if I have it, otherwise pass nil. So that's how we load the component. It's like that. And so inside of our React component, I'm using that property, this.props.email, and then I'm deciding if we want to give them the logout link or the login. I have this variable for a menu, the open menu, so it's just a white background. We do this little inline if statement. So if we have the email property, we're going to use, it's kind of a weird syntax, but use the and operator, and then it will conditionally apply this this email part right here. So it has user@example.com. And then regardless, we want this little close menu, this little X here to close it. And so then inside of later in the render, if it's open, if the state is open, that's what I'm keeping track of, whether the menu is open. If the state is open, show the open menu. If it's not, show the closed menu, which is just these little bars, little hamburger button right there. So pretty simple. There's a button that is wrapping that hamburger menu that calls toggle menu. So if I go up, pretty simple here. I'm just setting the state. If it's open, and then just toggling it. So whatever the value is, set it to the opposite. True to false, false to true. Simple state value if it's open. So not anything too exciting going on here, but just wanted to mention it. Okay, so now let's fix up this login page first. Oops. I have some extra code inside of the layout from when we were talking about try. Yeah, so we don't need this. Okay, so what I want to fix is that when I hit login, nothing happens. And so even if I put in just garbage stuff, if you put in the wrong thing, it should say, hey, put in the wrong info. So let's go to our sessions controller, which controls the login. And so here's what our create action is doing. We're saying login the user based on the params we get, redirect them to the input path if they log in, and then otherwise we're just going to render the new page again. And so in here what I want to do is I want to add an error message to the user model, because if we look at our sessions view, inside of the form we're seeing if there are any errors, if user.errors.any, and then we're just making a list of all the errors, printing them out. And so if, assuming that the login has failed, which in this block it will have, because if it passes, it goes in here, we'll do user.errors.add, and so here you would put the field name and then a message. So for example, you could say email is blank, so you could say like email is blank, but here we want to apply just a generic message. Like this isn't specifically on the email, it isn't specifically on the password, it's kind of both. So instead of applying it directly to a field like that, so here we have the field name, here we have the type of error, and then you can customize the message. What I want to do is I just want to apply it to the base, just the base model, and just say email or password wasn't valid. And so now if I come back to here and I just click login, cool. So we see that, add a period, just see if that looks better. Okay, cool. So now we have this error message showing. So let's go to sign up. So I have these first and last name fields, and but those don't exist on the model. So let's make a new migration. Rails G migration, add first, last to users. So open that up. So we're going to do add column, users, first name, which is a string. Let's make it null false. Same thing. Let's add last name, make it null false. And this should fail because when we migrate this, we have existing users that don't have a first or last name. Yeah, and so we get this PG error, Postgres error, not null violation, column first name contains null values. So we're trying to make this constraint on the column to say these can't be false, but we have existing users where that would be null. So what we need to do is basically drop our users. So user.destroy all. You can see here that this also deletes from the records. And if we open our user model, it's because we've specified this dependent destroy. So if a user gets destroyed, there's really no point in keeping their records sitting around. Maybe there's a case where you do. Maybe you want like historical data, and so you'd rather just mark these as like a fake delete. But in this case, we're just doing dependent destroy. So now if we go back, now that we have no users, and run our migration again, here RDM is just an alias for Rails DB migrate that I have. Okay, so we add the columns. Inside of our user model, let's go ahead and add some validations, because right now our validations are kind of weak. And so the difference between a Rails validation and the null false that we're specifying, so when you do it in a migration, right, what this is doing is it's creating a constraint in the database. So if we go to our schema file, we can see that first name has this null false in the database. So this will prevent any record from being inserted or updated to where this value is null. If we didn't have this, there are ways to get around the active record validation. There are ways to say basically like save this without running validations. You could also maybe mess up a validation or get it deleted accidentally. And so you really want both. So the Rails validation's purpose is to give you these nice error messages so the user can see, and then the database validation or constraint is to assure at the last second that there's no way that this data could be wrong. So let's add some Rails validations just for niceness, because what happens here is, let's go ahead and submit this sign up form. So if we submit this, we should expect this to fail because we're not specifying a first or last name. Okay, and so we get this same Postgres error when we tried to migrate. So this value is null. And it's throwing an exception here. So the application is actually erroring. And so we don't want it to do that. What we want it to do is we want to show this message, these nice error messages. So now if we add validates first name, last name, and we'll say present's true. So this field is required. Now if we submit this again, we can see that we have this nice error message instead of erroring. So that's the purpose of a Rails validation, is for the user, and the database is for you to make sure that your data stays right, the database constraint. Okay, so now we have these fields being validated. If we put stuff in here, we'll see that it doesn't actually work because we're not accepting this attribute from the controller. So let's go to our registrations controller. And inside of our signup parameters, we need to accept first name and last name. So now this should work. Okay, great. So one thing else that we need to do is our email validation is, the only thing we're testing for email right now is uniqueness. And in our database, we also have a null false on that column. We also have an index that is asserting it's unique, but what we're not checking is that it is a valid email. So if we do this, that worked. And there I didn't even have an @ symbol in our email. So let's add a very simple email validation. If you look at how to validate an email with a regex or regular expression, it's pretty complex. So let's just see what Stack Overflow says. Validate email with regex. So this is the regular expression that they say works 99%. So emails are actually, the format of an email is actually very complex. There's just so many possibilities and so many weird things that can happen. So rather than exclude, so this works 99% of the time, that's probably good enough. But I also don't ever want to run into problems with an email. So what I normally do is I just do a very simple email format. And so to test out this regular expression, since we're using Ruby, I like to use rubular.com. So what we can do here is we can put in some emails. And let's put in some valid ones, and let's put in some invalid ones. So here's all of our test strings. We've got these. So we have a valid email, another valid one, another one that's missing. It's missing something after the @ sign. So we have something that's missing something before the @ sign, no @, nothing after the @ sign. And so really these first three should pass. Even though to us this f@.com is not, that's not a real email address, but our validation is going to be so simple that it will work. So what you do is you type in the expression here, and then as you type, it shows you which one of these match. So regex is can be kind of confusing, and I do not use it a lot, but there are some things that it is good for, like matching patterns of things. That's like what you would use it for. So I try not to use it unless I absolutely have to. It is hard to read and not obvious. So using our little cheat sheet down here, if you're not familiar with regular expressions, so you can type something. So one of the simplest things is the dot, and the dot means match any single character. The two most common things you'll use are the star and the plus sign. So the star means 0 or more of the thing. The @ means 1 or more of the thing. So if I do dot and then star, so I'm saying match any single character 0 or more times. So this basically means everything. If we use the plus, they're saying match any single character 1 or more times, but there has to be at least 1. So what we're going to do, just very simply, is we're going to say match anything 1 or more times. So there has to be something. At the beginning, there has to be something. Then there has to be an @. Then at the end, there has to be at least 1 or more things. And so this is going to be our very simple match. Very naive, but we know that we want something, we want an @ and then we want something after the @. Now, if we use stars here, where we're saying there can be nothing, you see a lot more of these pass, because the star is saying you can have 0 of these things or more. And so we don't want things like this to pass, F and then the @ the @ with nothing in front of it. So we'll use the plus here. So very simple. And let's come back to our project and we'll do, so we're going to validate that's unique, and then we're going to validate the format with this regular expression. And then we're going to give it a message that say must be valid. And the other thing I like about Rubular, and other places do this, you can make a permanent link. So you can grab this, and you can, what I usually do, because this here I have all these examples, what I normally do is I just paste this in the code. So because when you, granted this is simple, but if you came back to this in the code base, you might say, okay, what is this doing? What examples did you test with? So now that we have this link, we can just go straight there and see, like, okay, these are the examples I was testing with, which is kind of nice. Okay, so now we have this validation. So let's go ahead and put some stuff in the first and last. So now if we do our just invalid email, we should see an error message for that. Okay, email must be invalid, or email must be valid. And then if we do a valid email, then we sign up. Okay, one last thing I want to fix, and that is that our seed data should now be broken at this point. As we added the first name, we're not specifying our first name here. So if we run railsdb seed, should error because we're not specifying a first name. Okay, and it does. Now we're hitting the active record validation since we added those. First name can't be blank, last name can't be blank. So very simply, we're just going to add so there's our first and last name. Run our seeds again. And then we log in. Okay, and so now everything works. Okay, well, that's where I'll leave it for today. And I think we're getting to a point where we can deploy this and get it out in the wild. So next time we'll do that, and then we'll start using it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in a comment below or hit me up on Twitter @JohnMosesman. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.